As the 2024 track and field season is soon drawing to a close, it's time to take a deep dive into everything that's happened this year. In this video, we'll be reviewing my 2024 season as it's unfolded, whilst I give my top 5 tips for how to manage your season effectively. I'm giving real life examples of where each of these tips can be applied to take your sprinting decision making to the next level. I mentioned in the last video, I'd take the opportunity to sit down and run everyone through everything that's happened this season. I thought I would break them down and try and use my journey and my story this year to try and illustrate a few points. So we're going to be going through 5 key things or 5 decisions that everyone as an athlete has to make throughout the course of a season in order to make sure that they stay on track. But we're going to break down these 5 key points that I've got for you today and look at how they apply to my season. So I'm going to be watching the races on my phone. I'll pop them up. When we get to them, I'll break it down. I'll be analysing the races as we go along as well from a technical standpoint. So without further ado, let's hop right into it. So the first race that we're going to get into is the county championships. That was my season opener in the 100 metres. A pretty standard opener for me. I always run the 100 at the county championships. So we've got the heats here. I'm in one of the centre lanes. I feel like I get a decent start, but the thing that I notice is that I'm pretty choppy straight away. Open up, but I just look pretty tight the whole way. Yeah, 10.75, and it's a minus 1.4 wind, but we moved on to the final, which was later on. And in the final, I was just looking to get a bit more of an aggressive start and really push out of the blocks. I got out better, definitely, but I would say my transition wasn't the best. I kind of looked up too soon. I didn't keep pressing through the entire transition, which meant that it probably limited my top speed a little bit. Stopped the clock in 10.69, and that was a minus 2 wind. So that was my season opener. Pretty similar to what my other 100 metre season openers go like. I think at my fastest season opener is 10.51, but that was with like a plus 1.5 wind. So moving on from that, it's going to take us to Tenerife, and this was my season opener in the 200. So this is a lot different to what my season opener normally goes like in the 200. It's normally a pretty low-key race, whereas this, I was against some really top-class guys. So getting into the blocks, I knew I was against some competitive guys, so I needed to get out as quickly as possible. I get out the blocks okay, my reaction time wasn't the best, and as you can see, I hit a flat spot at about 30 metres, and that just kills all my momentum, and then the guy on the inside of me comes straight past. I try to respond to that, and basically burn so much fuel from around 80 to 120, and it leaves me so tired coming down the home straight. I finished somewhat okay, but normally my finish is a lot stronger than that. But yeah, 21-1. It was an okay opener. It was similar to what I normally run, but I definitely was not happy with that at all. The third race of this little first half of the block was Loughborough International. I ran the 100 metres here, and this was a similar story. A bit of a headwind. I ran 10.65, just a bit sluggish, struggled to get into my running. Felt okay when I got into my top end, but really took a long time to get going. So yeah, my openers were okay. They weren't quite what I wanted them to be, and that leads me on to my first key point that we're going to be talking about today. So number 1 of 5 is going to be don't panic and don't compare. So what I mean by that is, for me especially, at the start of the season, you see results from a lot of other people, and everyone has a different plan for the season. Everybody peaks at different points. It depends what's been going on in the few weeks in the build up to training, depends what kind of load you're under. But for me personally, I always typically open up quite a ways away from where I end up at the end of the season. Even probably last year, I panicked when I season opened in 21 seconds. I ended up getting down to 20.4. Even the year when I ran 20.2, which is my PB, I opened the season in 21 flat, and that's just a typical race pattern for me. Through the season, we get a lot quicker because in May, when we open up, we're still under very heavy training load and we sharpen up through the season. So that's the key thing. Don't panic and trust your training. Think about the long-term goal. So if your goal is nationals that's in 6-8 weeks time, then as long as you're progressing through to that point, then it's fine. We're going to move on to the next race. After those first openers, I went over to Belgium for a 200 metres, and this was just a few days before, well actually this was the day before the European Championship team was selected. So I went out there, running the 200. The track was dubbed to be a fast track because the bend was wide, so I was happy about that. Got there, the conditions were subpar, but not too bad. There was a lot of other guys there that had significantly quicker seasons best than me. I was one of the only people going into it in my specific race. that had not broke 21 seconds so far in the season. I got a much better start this time. I drove round the bend for longer. I still kind of let my foot off the gas a little bit early. Ideally, my race pattern is to get all the way to about 70 or 80 before I start cruising. I let off at about 40 this time, but I got a little bit further. And then down the home straight, I felt much stronger this time because I trusted my race pattern, and I finished in 20.85, which was a nice season's best, and it put me back on track to where I was this time last year at the time. So 20.85 in my second 200 of the year. I think it actually took me 3 attempts to go sub 21 last year. So I thought, well, this is a lot better. Unfortunately, I didn't get selected for the European Championship team. I'd ran the qualification standard from the year before, but unfortunately I didn't make the cut for the team. There was a couple other guys that had ran the standard also, and it came down to a decision at the selection meeting, and I didn't get given the benefit of the doubt, unfortunately. So I was disappointed about that, but we ploughed on through the rest of the season, and this leads me on to my next point. So point number 2 is making a plan and sticking to the plan. So although I got into a bit of a difficult situation, my plan at the start of the season was to run at the European Championships. That didn't happen, so I had to kind of readjust the plan midway through the season. But as long as you have a key goal in mind and you're working towards this goal in some way, shape or form, and having some set rules that you put out as to what's going to be best for you to get there, then that's the key thing. So for me, it was, the ultimate one was the Olympic trials. The European Championships was meant to be a stepping stone. When that got took away and I didn't have that opportunity to go there anymore, I had to fill that gap. So I signed up for a race at Lee Valley in London, and I signed up for the 100 and the 200. The 100 was first in the morning. I feel like I get a good start, but my transition was pretty weak. So it meant that I lost about a metre on the field from about 20 to 40, but my top end speed was great in this race, probably the best top end speed that I've ever hit. 10.21, but the wind was over the allowable limit. It was like a +4 wind, so pretty hefty, but I felt like I was moving really well. There was 2 rounds of the 100. I opted to skip the second round of the 100 to focus on the 200 because I was obviously chasing a fast 200 time as well. I felt a bit strange during my warm-up, and this is going to lead on to the next point in a moment, but I finished the warm-up, got into the blocks. As soon as the gun went off, I instantly felt a lot of power loss, like I couldn't really put force through my legs, especially on this left side. I was just really struggling to navigate around the bend. When we got to about 50 or 60, I just felt like a sharp pinch in my left hamstring on the outside, so I just stopped straight away. Obviously really disappointed, initially not really sure what was going on. This was now 4 weeks out from the national championships. I'd been building throughout the entire year. Hamstring strain, 4 weeks out, it's really not great. We was really stretching the timeline if I wanted to be back fit for this competition. So point number 3, making sacrifices. I mean, making sacrifices in terms of picking your battles. And here's the thing. So initially, I didn't think it was too bad. So I had a race booked in Sollentuna in Sweden for another 200. So 2 weeks later, I went out there. We'd been chasing for the whole season, trying to get myself in shape. But now, since I picked up this hamstring injury, we was really chasing. And I realized when I got there, I started warming up, doing my pre-meet, and my hamstring just didn't feel right. It was still tweaking, it was still twinging, and I thought to myself in the moment, if I do this race, there's a very high chance that this is gonna get re-injured, and re-injured to the point where I've got absolutely no chance of making it to the Olympic trials in one piece. So ultimately, I made the tough decision to withdraw from that race whilst I was out there. But thankfully, I had 4 weeks in total to get this hamstring as bulletproof as possible to get me round 2 rounds at the British Championships. Managed to get back into some decent running on week 3, and on week 4 we got 1 or 2 sessions where I could actually run at pace. I think I ended up having 1 session where I ran flat out over about 60 meters. We didn't do any bend running. That's another sacrifice that we had to make. We sacrificed bend running, which was something that I personally do really need a lot of because the bend is typically my weak point in the 200. I sacrificed running on the bend because that was a huge risk of re-injuring my hamstring. So we stuck to the straights, only ran flat out down the home straight. Ultimately, anyone that watched my Olympic trials video will know that it didn't really go to plan. What basically happened is I really struggled around the bend. In the heats, I ran 20.98 seconds and I came through pretty well down the home straight, but around the bend you can see that I'm just really struggling. Instantaneously, as soon as I come out of my drive phase, I'm kind of just thinking it feels awkward. and I'm worried about my hamstring because I just feel super alien going around the bend. It just felt strange because we'd avoided bend running for the last 4 weeks, and subconsciously I was battling with myself to actually let go. But thankfully we made it through to the final as a fastest loser. Unfortunately drew lane 1 in the final, which everyone knows is not ideal, but I thought, you know what, after everything I've been through in the last 4 weeks, I'm in the British final, let's just go for it, see what happens. So I got out the blocks, struggled around the bend, left myself massively out of the race down the home straight, and came through in 7th place in the end. I ran 21.10 seconds. The conditions weren't great, but even still it was massively down from where I expected myself to be, especially because the last 2 years before that I'd won silver medals, and to come 7th place after winning back-to-back silver medals, I was pretty disappointed in myself. After some initial, like I said, disappointment, the road to Paris was over. My main goal was to make the Olympic team. I ended up pretty far away from that in the end after all the setbacks. Some subpar races in there, battling injury obviously. But I dusted myself down after a few days, and then I asked myself, which is the title of point number 4, I asked myself, what's next? And this is super key. You always have to ask yourself what's next, because after the Olympic trials, it was kind of like, well, the season could realistically be over here, because the initial plan for the season was to make the Olympic team, do some more training, maybe do a tune-up race, go to the Olympics and compete there. None of that happened. Pretty much nothing that I planned actually panned out the way that I thought it would. So it's important to ask yourself, what is next in the season? You need to keep some form of structure in the season and have something to work towards. Even if you have to pivot and switch to a new goal, something to work towards, it's super important that you have something to pivot to so you can keep some kind of order and structure within the season. For me, I asked myself, what's next? I had a race booked in Ireland, and I decided I'm going to use that as a bounce back race, and then we're going to plan around that and lead into the England National Championships, which was a few weeks after that. And I just ran 21.1 in my last race at the British Championships, so I knew like I had to come back and produce a good performance. So getting into the blocks, I just told myself, you need to commit to this now. Get over the fear of running around the bend. I'm healthy, let's go and do it. So I got out the blocks a lot more aggressively, and I stayed down and drove for longer. My transition was good. I hit the same flat spot around the second half of the bend, but that's something that we're going to work on going into next year. Got onto the home straight, and I was full of energy coming down the home straight. I picked up really good, but I managed to come through 2nd place in a very high class race as well in 20.67 seconds, which was like close to half a second quicker than the race that I ran literally 9 days earlier. So I was much happier with that. Bouncing off from that race, I just thought, I'm going to carry so much momentum from this. So we pivoted, made a new structure, which was focused around the England National Championships. And the first key point to get there was bouncing back in the 200. Ran a nice 20.6 season's best in Cork, which was a big stepping stone. I moved on to the 100 metres, which was actually down at this track in Sheffield. This is my training track, and I raced 2 rounds of the 100 here. This was just a super low-key meet. I just needed a race to get in because I decided I was going to run the 100 at the England National Champs. The first round, I got a pretty good start, but I was running a pretty solo race, so I got through the race. I felt pretty good in the moment, stopped the clock at 10:51, so felt pretty okay about it, but I knew that I could go quicker. I just felt like I didn't really open up. In the second round, same thing. I felt like I got out, my transition was a bit longer. I'm not sure if I held onto it for too long. Felt like I hammered my foot down a lot longer, maybe forced it a little bit too much in the last 20 metres. I'm kind of leaning for the line too early, but stopped the clock in 10.50, which was a season's best at the time. Again, not as quick as I wanted it to, but I managed to bounce back, run a 20.6 200, a 10.50 100, and we was back on track. So leading on from that, I decided to race at the England National Championships. This was the kind of pivot that we mentioned earlier. Got myself in the heats, and I ran probably my best race of the entire year in this heat. I stopped the clock at 10:52, and the wind was -4.8, so a huge headwind. The way I ran was just perfect. I wasn't leading to 60 because I was next to a super fast starter, but I just trusted my transition, trusted my top end speed, and I came through over the second half just perfectly. I kept nice and relaxed, I stayed composed, and that was basically a perfect race model. Obviously the only thing that ruined it was the wind in terms of the time, but I had a lot of confidence from that. So we led into the semi-finals. I was the fastest qualifier from the heats. Into the semi-finals, unfortunately, I didn't get the best reaction time. Got myself into a pretty bad position around 60 meters where I was pretty much out of the race. Somehow managed to claw myself through the field, but was running pretty tense and came in 3rd place. 10.48 I came through in the end. Luckily managed to qualify for the final as a fastest loser, which meant that I drew lane 9 and I just had to make the most of it. So into the final, I said at the start, if I make the final, I feel like I've done pretty good, but really I want to get on the podium. Gun goes off. I get my worst start out of all 3 of the races of the day. I'm completely out of the race at 40, 50 meters. Get that top end speed, start coming through, but again, because I was so far behind from the field, I was chasing, I wasn't controlling the race, I wasn't commanding my own race pattern. I was responding to everyone else, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a massive mistake. Crossed the line in 10.53 seconds into, again, another pretty decent headwind, but came in 4th place. I missed the podium by 0.06 or something like that. Even though I finished in 4th place, didn't get the result that I wanted from the national championships after the heats. I left that championship and thought, this is brilliant. I've got a lot of momentum rolling from this. After all the uncertainty of running slow at the start of the season, the injury, underperforming at the national championships, I now had something tangible in terms of solid times and good performances to roll with for the rest of the year. About 5 or 6 days after the England Nationals, I came down and ran a session, and the day after, my heel started to get a little bit sore and it was just really starting to bother me. I gave myself 2 options. Option A, just manage the pain, you know, because it's only for a few weeks, do these races and hope for the best kind of thing. Option B was to just choose one of the races and lead in towards that one race, forget about the other 2. The heel didn't really improve as much as I wanted it to, so we came to the decision that option A and B were both straight out of the window. We was going to do option C, which was to end the season. This leads us right into the last point, number 5. Listen to your body. This is probably the most important one. It might be a little bit cliche because I'm sure everyone's heard this at some point, but number 5, listen to your body, I think is the most important one. And this goes back to what I mentioned earlier in the video as well, is have structure and also have your long-term goals cemented in your mind, and all the decisions that you make should be aiming towards this long-term goal. And obviously now for me, I've pivoted from the Olympic trials and then the England National Championships. My next mid to long-term goal is looking on to next season. So instead of risking everything for the sake of running a couple quick times which don't really impact next year whatsoever, I thought it's better to end the season here. Decided to leave the season with a couple of seasons best, 10.48 and 20.67, and ended the season. So quickly recapping on the 5 points that I mentioned. Number 1, don't panic and don't compare. At the start of the season, if you're struggling, if your times aren't where you want them to be, everyone has different goals, everyone has different training. So just trust the process for a few weeks, trust the training that you're doing, and don't stress too much until you get closer to those big championships where it really matters. Number 2, making a plan and sticking to it. Typically happens at the start of the season, so make sure that you're getting that down. Even if you have to pivot and restructure mid-season, as long as you've got a decent foundation to base that off and to change as and when it fits, you need to have that structure, as we mentioned. Planning as you go along is just stressful, so make sure you have that plan as to what races you're going to do, how you're going to taper, and make sure that you're getting that feedback so that you know exactly what's going on at all stages of the season. Number 3 was making sacrifices and choosing your battles wisely. You know, you can't race at every single meet, but sometimes you've got to miss out on certain opportunities, certain races, certain meets to get to your long-term goal, which is leading back onto number 2, which was have that plan. So once you've got the plan, you've got your long-term goals in mind, it's easier to choose your battles because you know exactly what's leading towards that long-term goal, that big point of the season where this is the key competition. You might have 2 or 3 of those. It's easier to kind of make sacrifices when you know what you're working towards. Number 4, ask yourself what's next. After a bad race, after a good race, this again helps tie back into keeping that structure. Ask yourself what's next. It keeps you on track, stops you from derailing the season if things, you know, maybe aren't going to plan. Ask yourself, what is next in this season? What can I get out of this season? What did I come into the season wanting to achieve? What can I do to get myself back on track and get myself where I want to be? And the last one, listen to your body. If something happens, you take everything serious with your body. This is a game of physical performance, and you can only show up and run fast if you're in one piece and you're healthy. So that should be your number one priority. Obviously with diet, training, recovery, sleep, all of those things, you know, that just should be a given. But in terms of when things do go wrong, you might have a little injury, make sure you're taking things serious. Don't just let something sit for too long. Don't be too hasty when you have had a little injury to try and get back running straight away. All these points link back to the main thing, which is structure. Have that structure, have that plan, and once you've got that, everything that happens, you can make little tweaks in between, but make sure you've got that plan there, and everything that happens through the season, you can keep moving forward no matter what happens. Overall, the season was not even close to what I wanted it to be, but I'm thankful that I've come out of it with lessons learned. Still ran some decent times considering like I spent over 17 weeks of it injured, and I think the reason why I've managed to get through it all is because, like I mentioned earlier, I kept that structure in the season. I didn't let the season just get derailed by the issues that I had. That's my 2024 season wrapped up. As I mentioned in the last vlog, I'm now going to be doing a little bit of training, mostly on the bike, in the gym, just keeping myself fit over the next few weeks, and then going to be having a bit of a break for a couple of weeks. And then late September, we're going to be getting back into some solid training, and we're going to be on the road to the Tokyo World Championships. As always, thanks for watching. Appreciate everyone's support on the Speed Operation Season 1, and I'll see you in a video soon.